happy first Friday of June. Hope you guys are off to an awesome start and a great first half of the year. We've got a lot of awesome content today, so I'm going to jump right into this introduction. All right, so what if small shifts in our mindset could transform the way we work and live? Our guest today has made it his mission to help leaders and teams do exactly that. Nolan Nichols is a Fortune 500 keynote speaker, master storyteller, which I can attest to, and founder of A Million Dreams. With a master's degree in education and a track record of working with industry-leading brands, he delivers high-energy, thought-provoking keynotes that leave audiences with practical tools that they can apply immediately to the stories of their own lives. Nolan's a trusted advisor to some of the world's biggest brands and has a unique ability to inspire action. I can also attest to that. Nolan helps organizations and individuals bring the best version of themselves to work and thrive in a world of disruption, which I know some people listening to this can relate to. I've personally worked with Nolan for over 10 years at Virginia Tech, doing some really cool football broadcast type of stuff, and can attest to his awesomeness. So Nolan, you are one of the busiest people I know. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Only second busiest to you, Bryan. Really appreciate it. I value so much the work that you and the team and the organization does, and just really excited to be on the conversation today.
Some of our hot topics today. So can we, in fact, create an unforgettable transaction interaction every single time? I don't know, that's bold, but we're gonna try to talk about that. And Nolan's got some great perspective there. We're gonna talk heavy EX, right? And that's the next frontier for CX. A lot of people are finally acknowledging that, but we got to talk EX. We're going to talk Gen Z, something that is becoming more and more important in a changing workplace, lots of dynamics going on. How do we coach, lead, take CX to the next level with Gen Z as our partners along the way? So pretty good time. So maybe let's start toward the beginning of that list, right, Nolan? So talking about unforgettable interactions and transactions.
Yeah, so I'm just going to back up for a moment here and talk a lot in kind of like stories and analogies. And there was this. Everybody's heard of the Olympics. You might have watched the Winter Olympics earlier this year. I want to rewind the clock back to the 2004 Olympics. It's in Athens, Greece. There's this rifle athlete for the United States. His name is Matt Emmons, and everybody knows that Matt's going to win his competition, and he's in the 3-position 50-meter rifle competition, which means it would be like going to midfield at Virginia Tech when Bryan and I are filming the games. It would be like going midfield. You're at midfield. The target is somewhere in the end zone. So it's a pretty long distance away. The athletes, they fire for multiple rounds. You start shooting on your stomach, then you shoot on your knees, then you shoot standing up. Experts say it's the most intense of all the Olympic athletes, of all the Olympic sports, because you have to fire your shot in between heartbeats, because a heartbeat can throw off your shot. And Matt Emmons, again, he shoots for the United States. Everybody knows he's going to win. He's in the final round, and he has so much of a lead that he doesn't even need a good shot. He just needs a shot on the board. He doesn't need a bullseye. He just needs a shot. And he knows he's in a good spot. Final round, final shot. Matt goes up, fires, bullseye. Matt is feeling great. He looks at the leaderboard, and he's not in first anymore. He's not in second place. He's not in third. He falls off the podium. He goes down to 8th place. And he's like, this has got to be a glitch. But he looks and realizes he fired at the wrong target. So sometimes success can look like a bullseye, but at the wrong target. So it's easy to get tunnel vision in today's world. Matt, he says he normally would take a couple seconds to make sure he's aligned right, but he just got caught up in the moment. Matt would go on to win other gold medals, thankfully, but he could have had one more, right? I mean, he was literally like touching the gold medal. But it's so easy in today's world. You get so tunnel vision. I mean, you look at, politics, geopolitics, completely unpredictable. Economics feels unstable. Technology is advancing at a rate that it's hard to keep up. It's hard to stay 6 steps behind, much less keep up with. So there's a lot happening in the world today. And I think the X factor is, how do we create memorable moments, right? How do we create experiences that people remember, interactions that people remember? It would be like, pretend like you're walking in Home Depot and you see your friends, Mike and Colleen, they did a couples trip to Paris. And you ask them, hey, Mike and Colleen, I saw that you went to Paris. How was your trip? You know what they're going to say. They're going to say it was a great trip. Everybody should go. What a great city. But time out for a minute. let's go back to see how great of a trip it really was. So their trip starts out, they realize they didn't have free check bags on the boarding. They had to pay $150 a person. The trip hasn't even started yet. They try to get in the TSA line, but they look on Apple Wallet. It doesn't have the TSA pre-check. They have to go to the normal line. It's a red-eye flight. They get no sleep because it's really tight quarters. They get there and they can't find the metro map. They find it. They get on the wrong train. They get the hotel. They finally get in the hotel and they checked in, and then they go to Eiffel Tower. There's people everywhere. They go to this authentic Parisian restaurant, but a little bit too authentic because they don't know what they're ordering. Just all these, they wait in a long line to see the Mona Lisa, and really the Mona Lisa is pretty underwhelming. So why does Mike and Colleen, when you ask them in Home Depot, how was their trip? They say it was a great trip. It's because they think of three things. They think of this one meal where they knew what they were ordering. It was a slight breeze. They were people watching for hours. They think of this park where they were at, people playing chess. Time seemed to stand still. These beautiful gardens and vistas in the distance. They think of, number three, they think of the Eiffel Tower, how it would sparkle at night for 5 minutes at the top of every hour. When you ask somebody how their trip was, whether it's to Paris, whether it's to Disney World, whether it's to New York City, the minute by minute score is actually pretty lousy. I mean, you go to New York City, you're going to see some things you wish you didn't see. You're going to smell some things you wish you didn't smell, but you're going to see this amazing Broadway play and you'll be like, this is an amazing trip. The point is, when we travel, we think about the moments and not the minutes, but when we live our lives, we do the opposite. We think about the minutes instead of the moments. So when we're interacting with people and customers in our teams, how do we create more moments, right? What are the moments that you're building for yourself, for your team, for your customers, that's really going to stand out? And I think, it's so pivotal today, I think, to really double down on how do we create a moment? And to kind of unpack that just really briefly before we kind of get more into it, I think there's three ingredients that it takes to really build more moments. One is time, connection, and meaning. So starting with time. Time is about intentionality, making an effort to get this done. If you have connection and meaning, but you don't have time, that's wishful. It's not going to happen. Connection. A lot of times connection is with other people, right? And especially with customers, it directly is other people or with members of your team. But connection can also be personally, like, you think about how do you be the best leader you can be. Sometimes connection, there's a difference between being alone and lonely. Like sometimes you need moments alone to kind of recharge. That could be a form of connection, or connection to a higher being, a higher calling, or a connection to your younger self or your future self. Connection can look differently, but it's a big component, because if you have time and meaning, but you don't have connection, it's going to feel lonely. And the third thing is meaning. That is the third ingredient. It's got to have a purpose. It's got to stand for something. So if you have time and connection, but you don't have meaning, it's going to feel hollow. So time, connection, meaning, you kind of put those three things together. And that's really where you kind of get that magic. That's where you build that moment that people can remember.
Yeah, that's a lot of gold in there. That time, connection, meaning is really interesting. A lot of our customers at the Daniel Group are original equipment manufacturers, right? And they're getting really important, big, heavy machines out there in the world. And then you need service, you need parts, you need advice, you need help with the ownership of those machines. And so lots of times customers are coming back into the dealership, with something's broken, right? Think emergency room for a minute. Like, you're glad you're there because something's broken, but nobody ever planned on being there. And you don't really even want to be. You certainly are afraid of what it's going to cost, right? And so, the time seems like one of the things that can be a big challenge for our employees, our team members today, because everybody generally gets, the sense of urgency, like I should try to help this person, but processes and systems may not think as fast as the humans do. And so maybe talk about that for a minute from an employee experience perspective, giving the time, and the meaning and the connection. That connection piece feels like a place to work, a place to develop.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. I think there's a lot of things don't go to plan with any industry, right? And issues pop up, and they've done studies on it that when there's an issue, if it's handled well, people actually leave that experience feeling better about the company, better about the product than they did if everything went perfectly. So actually, when things are in a hiccup, this is actually an opportunity to really shine even more, to be like, hey, when I have a problem, this company, this organization, these people, they have my back. And I think really leaning into that hey, we want to go as fast as possible, but we also want to seize the moment. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So it's like there's going to be some things that might slow us down a little bit, but there is some friction that is good. Like, not all friction needs to be eliminated. The fact that you're interacting with somebody else, hey, we want to get their problem done as quick as possible because they need their product as well. But also, this is a time to understand what's their problem, what's their need, how can we do something that actually helps them in the future. Hey, if this happens again, we can do X, Y, and Z to help solve this need, so that they're not just leaving with the problem fixed, but they actually have a plan in case this comes up again in the future. And there's a lot of different ways this can look like. Maya Angelou, she said a quote, she said, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. So there's a lot of creative ways in terms of how do we really serve the customer better. And Maya Angelou also said, she was a great human being. She also said, people will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. So when they leave the facility, or when they leave your interaction, do people feel heard, cared for? And I think that is a huge X factor into really seizing every moment, that sometimes the problems and challenges, they can actually be tremendous opportunities. Again, speaking in like a analogy, airplanes, Bryan, I know you're on a lot of airplanes. You're on several of them this week. Think about, everybody on this call, think about what your home airport is. And you might notice that sometimes when you take off a different direction one day than the next day. And that's not because air traffic control is like, I wonder what type of view we want to give passengers today. No, it's a science to it. So air traffic control, the airlines, the pilots, they always want a plane to take off against the wind. Because if it takes off against the wind, the airplane is going to use less fuel than if it took off with the wind. You can have a huge jumbo jet international airplane. It will use less fuel when it takes off against the wind than with the wind. So the headwinds, the challenges, the friction, it actually lifts the airplane higher instead of bringing it down. So when there is a lot of challenges and things pop up, we don't wish problems to happen with our products, right? But when they do, this is an opportunity to take the time to build that connection, because this is really something that can have a positive ripple effect.
Yeah, that's awesome perspective. Punchline: headwinds can be good. In many cases, headwinds are good. When you're talking, you're talking to large groups, right? You're in front of a lot of corporations and big leader groups, and you talk about how to cultivate, foster, fuel, ignite, in some cases, this connection horsepower, this connection equipment within their customer facing teams. What are some of the challenges that corporate leaders face nowadays, right? And I mean, part of that, just to slant it a little bit, part of that can be training and development, right? So a lot of organizations have safety training, process system training, but unleashing people to be themselves, to be compassionate, to spend time connecting. Lots of times that's not trained. Just wondering if when you run into that in the corporate landscape that you serve in, who's doing that well, or how do you break through there?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. And I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure this out today, because an organization is only as good as the people, right? And you need good strategy. Like, strategy keeps the lights on in your organization, but you need good culture, because culture keeps people there. And you want to retain and keep the best talent also. So, from a big picture perspective, you have places like, I think the airlines are interesting because they're dealing with the public a lot, especially on the folks in the front line. So you have people like Scott Kirby of United, Ed Bastian, CEO of Delta. Both of them have done a really great job of really focusing on the employee experience, because they're like, hey, if we care for our employees and trust our employees and empower our employees, like they're going to do a better job on the front lines. So, a part of it is like, hey, how can our organizations really invest in people? And what that looks like can look differently, right? I think relationships are the X factor. In every organization is different. Some people are, in the office 3 days a week. Some are in 5 days a week. Some are fully remote. And you can always create connection, whether it's remote or in person or 5 days a week. But the question is, how do we be intentional with time about that? And at the same time, there is benefit to being in the room with somebody else. So I know a couple organizations where they are remote, but they take 1 week a quarter to really dive in, get everybody in the same room. Everybody flies in and really like build those relationships back up. Remember during the pandemic, um, when people didn't know if people were going to go back to the offices, and I was in Denver actually, and I was with a friend, and I looked up, I saw an office building, and at the top of the office building, it said Zoom. I said, offices are going to come back because you think about Apple, Facebook and Meta, Amazon, Zoom, when all these places had offices, were building offices, and they literally own the technology not to have an office, that shows you that in person is premium. And whether folks have offices or not, it doesn't matter if you have an office or not. The fact is, do you have that in person connection? And I'll give you a couple of ideas of how that can look like within your organization. One thing that I've done to other organizations and that I've talked about in my keynotes is something it's called Fika, Fika. And I was in Sweden a couple years ago, and I love doing these walking tours to learn more about the history and culture. And the person that was doing the tour lived there in Sweden, obviously, and she was like, in Sweden, we have this thing called Fika, where twice a day, most people do it once a day, but our organization did it twice a day. They would go and get a coffee or pastry with a friend for like 30 minutes. They would do one in the morning, one in the afternoon. This doesn't include lunch. So this is something that you're doing beyond lunch. And, for awareness, the World Happiness Report comes out every May. The results just came out a couple weeks ago. I think Sweden was like number 6 world's happiest, and United States was like number 24 or something like that. It wasn't even in the top 20. And a lot of the countries that were the world's happiest were around Sweden. They're all cold weather countries, but they do such a great job at relationships. So what does that mean for us here in the States? I mean, we're not going to be able to do a lunch and two different coffee breaks, right? But what I would have done at other organizations and recommended where we do our own fika, where once a month or once a quarter, you go grab lunch with somebody else on your team that's from a different department. So I would get optional signups from everybody. It was never forced. But we get signups, and then I would put people in different bowls that they normally don't get to work with, and just go around the office. We would choose like different pairings of people that didn't get to work together. Because if you're able to build those relationships, it's only going to help increase the organization. It's the rising tide that lifts all boats. If we want to be more collaborative, we got to make sure we're breaking down the barriers for people to really go across the other side to folks they normally don't get to work with. And that can bring about, when you open up those communication channels, it opens up more ideas too. More problems can get solved because suddenly we're not in these silos, but we're breaking them down. Another idea would be reverse mentoring, where a lot of times we're used to the older, more seasoned veteran mentoring the entry level, and there's use in that. We shouldn't get away from that. But also, there's some things that the young professional sees things through a different lens, especially with social media and technology, that maybe it should be reversed, where the seasoned veteran is like, hey, how are you using AI? How are you using these other tools? How do you view companies? What are things that we're missing? Like, you've been on the job for 2 months. You know things that we don't because you're coming at it from a fresh perspective. So that reverse mentoring. And then, just building your own moments within your organization, whether that's, team meetings. Hey, we're going to recognize people that are going above and beyond. We're celebrating our wins. We're not just doing in the grind every day, but we're creating moments to celebrate our wins. Or maybe if you lead people, or whether you're a leader of direct reports or not, like every Friday, what if you handwrite just a short note and be like, hey, I see what you did here this week. I just want you to say, I appreciate you and I see you. You write those 3 sentences, it would take 4 minutes to write. That could be something that they carry with them the rest of their week, the rest of their month, the rest of their year. So it's about kind of seizing those opportunities all around to really be like, how do we grow relationships, and that is the rising tide to lift all boats.
Yeah, that's a good word. We'll change gears, kind of switch over here in a second to changing workforce and Gen Z a little bit, but running with that a little bit more. I kind of call that, we were, in Denver this week with some real top performing CX leaders at Caterpillar dealerships and others. And I call that the fuel for culture. And because it's really easy when you think about EX with the intentionality of, hey, a great culture, a great EX at the point of transaction, as well as the culture they work within. We want a great one because we want that to parlay and transfer right to the customer experience. That's a pretty easy concept. Where a lot of leaders get intimidated or worried is, how hard is that going to be? I mean, can I really, my team is 6 people. Can I really have a subculture within my company culture that's different, better, whatever? And those are challenging questions, but those very little tactical things, like just the power of eye to eye, hand to hand, and a note, right? Because at the beginning and end of the day, we're all human, right? AIs and the bots are certainly gonna ramp up in population, but we're still human. And so, yeah, that's good advice. And I just want to confirm and affirm for everybody that will transfer into customer experiences. It naturally transfers when you feel like you're part of something really big. I think the analogy I gave out there this week was, if you walk into a top tier college football locker room or a professional football locker room, even if you're not a football fan, you realize when you step in there, you are part of something way bigger than you that is incredibly powerful, and culture is maybe the most important thing you're about to step into. So yeah, that's a good word there. One of the things as we were prepping for this that you pointed out to me that I hadn't slowed down much to think about is like the changing workforce of today and the Gen Zs. I've got a whole bunch of them here in my house. I guess some have moved away, but that could be a handful. So what are you listening and learning and advising out there in the world around changing workforces and Gen Zers that are tomorrow's leaders?
Yeah, I love the locker room analogy that you use there because it's so true. Because if any good sports team, they have people focused on like development on the field, outside the field, and it's like, you want a championship level team. Listen, locker rooms that have bad culture can still win. They can still win games, but you certainly want people jiving with each other, and when working together in that same direction. I think there's a lot of things with sports that we can learn from, because what happens in the locker room, a lot of times there is a spillover effect on the field, whether it's good or bad. There is that spillover effect. Yeah, you talk about like the changing workforce dynamics, and going back in the locker room, like what is the effect in the locker room right now? Like, what is the mix of the locker room? And the fact is it's an interesting bag that we're in right now, or makeup, in terms of you have a younger population really entering into the workforce. And at the same time, earlier this week, actually on LinkedIn, it said that 1 in 4 people, just came out this week, 1 in 4 American workers are over the age of 55. So you have, a workforce that is over 55, and then at the same time, according to the UN, more than half the world's population is under 30. So you have this interesting dichotomy now, where you have a new workforce coming in, and you have a workforce that has been in the professional industry a while, and now it's like, okay, what do we do? Where do we go from here? I think there's 2 things that are going to require the leaders of today to really be able to build that culture amongst a lot of different age demographics. And part of it is, listen, Gen Z, the incoming generation, it's interesting, right? And it's different.
That's one word, yes.
Yeah. One person said their perspective of the world is different. I actually was reading this recently. It said a teacher recently asked a high school senior to set a goal to transition into a healthy adult. The student's response was, "I haven't seen a healthy adult yet." So, here's the thing. The world has not necessarily been kind to them when you look at growing up in a post 9/11 world, the '08 recession, then you have, the pandemic, you have a lot of, and then you have AI headwinds. People are feeling worried about what career should I go into, the rise of social media. There's been a lot of things that have shaped who they are. That's not an excuse per se, but it does help explain things. When I was at Virginia Tech, I was working there for several years, and I was managing the students. I was managing up to like 75 students at one time, which was both fun and interesting at the same time. I went to a seminar, Bryan, on the university was doing it on anybody that was managing students. And I'm like, "Oh, I should go to this. I'll probably learn something interesting." And I forget the exact percentage, but they said in the early to mid 2000s, only 30 some percent of students arrived on campus not having a summer job, any type of employment job. This could be working at the movie theater, not full time, obviously, but just a summer job. Uh, and in 2018, when I went to this, the number was over 50%. It was like 60, pushing 70% of students have never had a job. So that influences, and there's a lot of different reasons you could chalk that up for, maybe college is getting more expensive. People are coming from more affluent households, maybe where they didn't need a job for gas money. I don't know. But the point here is that it's very possible when you hire somebody on your team, it could be their first job. And you might think folks would know how to communicate or how to show up on work on time, that's kind of important, but that's not necessarily the case. So I think when it comes to managing teams, managing that next generation, we have to listen more. I think Winston Churchill once said this quote. He says, "It takes courage to stand up and speak. It also takes courage to sit down and listen." And I think it's going to take a lot of listening of like, hey, there's things we can learn from them, but also listening to how they are viewing things can help us speak into the problems that they're having, how we need to call them forward as well. They're in a little bit of a Peter Pan paradox in the sense that they've been overexposed to information earlier than they were. Smartphones, they're able to get information, AI, blog posts, YouTube. They're able to get, they're overexposed to information way more than what folks were growing up. But they're also underexposed to firsthand experiences later than they were ready. So they're also behind, especially coming off the pandemic, on those, people to people skills. And so one thing is like, it's going to take some listening to kind of figure out where everybody is. And two is coaching. Gen Z, when you really look into it, and I'm a nerd, I read a book a week. So I do a lot of research on whether it's Gen Z or AI, all this other stuff. I love to read. And one of the themes with Gen Z that I've read and seen firsthand is that they don't want to be managed per se, but they want to be mentored. So I think really kind of position yourself for that mentor role that nobody has really been able to show them a way forward, whether maybe they didn't grow up in a two-parent household or they just feel like they're skating through life or they're like asking AI all these questions, but they don't have somebody they can really talk to. Social media has also in some ways made us antisocial and lonely, that the next gen is craving mentorship. And I think that is something that's key as well. And they want to be able to run with stuff. I think they have a lot of good ideas. And it's also, how do we empower them to do what they are best at, while at the same time holding them to the standards of the organization's culture as well.
Boom, man, you said a lot there. It's so spot on, and with the lens on this particular topic of, right, there are traditional leaders. So I'll use myself as an example. Like, I'm an old guy. At one point I had hair, right, and whatnot. But, in my latter years of leadership, there's an element of people that are maybe successful leaders that are not Gen Z, that are doing well, hitting profit, hitting goals, growing in the company, good reviews, you name it. So like they're doing great. They can naturally, in a moment like this transitional time, say, why do I have to care about everything you just said about Gen Z? Why should I care? No. You're coming to my team. We have rules, we have culture, we have processes, and this is what you're going to do. Why? Because I said so. Like, so there's a lot of that permeates business leadership today. And I don't mean that in a negative way. That's kind of a realistic depiction for a lot of businesses. And so what you just kind of colored in for us, that we're trying really hard here to connect the CX, reverse engineering into the EX, reverse engineering into how to coach, how to mentor, how to lead. I think it was Zig Ziglar somebody like that who once said, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And with Gen Z, like that maybe could not be more appropriate, right? And so as leaders, just know that yes, there's that, and if you want to relate and you want to grow tomorrow's leaders, those are all really good things to know about Gen Z. Also know your ulterior motive, your end goal is your customer experience is going to scale, is going to grow, because if that's how you approach your culture, yeah, there's a lot of power in that, and some days that takes more patience than other days with the Gen Zers. I'm just saying. Oh, here's a big question. You and I were talking about this. I got asked this question a couple times this week at the leadership meeting. Should we pay for or incentivize great customer experience behaviors for employees? So, we at the Daniel Group are doing thousands of surveys a month. We're measuring transactions and interactions and getting really good feedback. Of course, from that, there are NPS scores or NLS scores. There's metrics, right? And sometimes leaders can be tempted to say, hey, if we want to grow that thing to the next level, we should pay for it. We should incentivize people to behave that way so we get a better score. Talk about that in the landscape you make a living in with a lot of big corporations and leadership. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, so this is a very it's a very layered question, right? And it can go a lot of different directions. And I just want to, preface it with this. You were talking about leaders there, Bryan, before we jump into the question. And, leaders today, the leaders that have worked in the past, that style might not work going forward. And this is true for any business. Like you look at any product, any cat product, everything has innovated over time, right? And the things that got us today aren't necessarily going to be the things that get us there tomorrow. So there's leadership principles that are tried and true. But I think a leader today, it used to be like Bryan, you and I know Virginia Tech, when the team runs out on the field, everybody's jumping, whether it's a pro or NFL stadium, everybody's, excited for the team to take the field. And the leader, the head coach, is normally the first out of the tunnel. I think we're entering an era where the leaders, it's less about the first guy out of the tunnel and everybody else is following them. And I think the leader of tomorrow is more like the leader's actually in the back pushing everybody forward. And I think
Mm.
that's the type of leadership that we're heading towards. And to continue with the sports analogy, I think leadership comes easier to certain people than others. And we have to be very careful about who we put in leadership positions, because if you look at sports, a lot of times the great quarterbacks are not the great head coaches. And a lot of times the great head coaches were mediocre players. It's because wearing a headset as a head coach and rallying the team, totally different than being a quarterback. And sometimes people are really good quarterbacks. You want the ball in their hands, and that's okay. Keep them on the field. Other people might be like they're really good at their job, but they're not necessarily the star athlete, but man, they got some qualities. Put the headset on them. They can rally the troops to go forward. So we also have to be very careful about who do we put in those leadership positions. Sometimes great quarterbacks don't make great leaders or the leaders of tomorrow. And pivoting back to your question, Bryan, about how do we motivate people? How do we put incentives in at what time? I'm going to kind of give some ideas here, and I'm not going to say that every organization's different, right? And it's kind of like sailing versus step-by-step direction. So if I put in my phone GPS, I live in DC, how to get to Richmond, Virginia, it will give me detailed instructions of how to get there. It'll tell me where the speed limit is there road work ahead, is there a police officer ahead. I'm really thankful for the police officer notifications, but
Yeah.
anyways, it gives you detail down to the 10th of a mile. Leadership going forward is not going to be like that, where it's not going to be step-by-step directions. It's more like sailing. Whereas you have principles, but is it high tide or low tide? What direction is the wind blowing? What's the wind gust like? How many people are on the boat? Is the boat balanced? Is there an undercurrent at play? When you're sailing, the conditions can change hour by hour potentially. So it's like, what's happening right now and how do we need to adapt? So when it comes to really motivating your team with finances, some ideas to think through is you want to focus on praise over prize for a long-term
Mm.
strategy. So I think financial incentives can work. in really specific scenarios. So, when the behavior is concrete, it's measurable, and it's inside the employee's control, incentives can be a big motivator there. Where I would be careful how much you press on this lever though. Like for example, if you're at an organization where you want your customer service to be here really great, and you feel like the culture of excellence for customer service is like here, and you need to bridge this gap, that can be incentives can be a really good tool to motivate in a shorter time span to get them to here. But if you feel like your organization is already here, then you've already established that culture of winning. So how do you also just kind of lean in? Actually, this is just who we are, So an idea for that would be if you feel like you need to bridge the gap, you could put that financial incentive again when something's concrete, measurable within the employee's control. But I would also be careful of how you message it. Like you don't want to put something in and then like a year later be like, hey, we don't need this anymore. We're taking it away. So what you could do is be like, hey, we're going to do a 6-month program, a 10-month program, a 12-month program. So before you start it, there's an end date. Folks know it's going to end. And then hopefully once you get to that point, now it can be like, okay, well now what do we do? Maybe we spotlight we have a special incentive where we spotlight somebody every quarter or every month, and we give them like an award for that. Or you could be like, hey, this money we were using for incentives to bridge the gap, what if we kind of like just build a little bit of that more into their base salary? Because that's the minimum. Like suddenly you want the ceiling to become the floor, right? You want the great customer service to be the floor. So you want people to start with great customer service. So once you get to that point, maybe some of that stuff, listen, it's part of the salary, And I think what you could really focus on is like if you have a great team that's doing great work, again, the ceiling has become the floor in terms of you're starting with great customer service as a baseline, maybe you reward longevity. Like it's really hard to retain great talent right now. So maybe you reward, hey, when you're here for a year, 2, 3 years, whether it's like extra PTO day every so often, or maybe there is like a financial incentive, or hey, we'll pay your flight to your vacation. Any domestic flight will help pay for your flight. You can get creative with it, but maybe you reward longevity so that people know, hey, I have a path. Like I don't have to get picked. I know if I stay here long enough, I will get that incentive. And at the same time, you've already created a culture where you have great workers. Now you have to keep them. So,
Mm,
I think incentives can help bridge that gap. Once you get to that level, then maybe you need to pivot to be like, actually, everybody's doing great work. How do we praise people? Like whether it's giving notes, whether at a team meeting, like you are giving praise to people. Never stop doing that. You should give that out all the time and be specific. Don't just be like, hey, you're doing a good job, but be specific. Hey, I loved how you handled this situation. Give praise always. But maybe the prize becomes how do we just want to reward you for staying part of this family, part of this group, part of this organization. You make us better. We want to show that. And then maybe the incentive change a little bit.
and there's a lot in there. Praise over prize. I love that. I actually wrote that one down. Hadn't heard that so simplified, but so true. Well, that's like the perfect tee up. It's almost like we rehearsed, and we really even didn't. We prepped, but we didn't rehearse. It's almost the perfect tee up of when you're thinking about that moment, everything you just shared, and you're thinking about a leader and let's say a customer facing frontline employee. Old school is, oh, hey, dude, the boss is coming, do your best behavioral things, right? And answer the phone with a smile, whatever, the boss is coming. And then from a leadership standpoint, you leave your office, you walk down to the front line where transactions are happening, and you're like, they better be doing what I expect, right? They better be doing what I expect because I've told them I expect that. And I think what we're trying to peel the onion back here and say, okay, starting probably this afternoon, maybe let's just say Monday, it's going to continue to change that workplace moment. And there has to be something bigger than the boss and the employee, or the employee's perception of the boss. And am I getting evaluated properly? There has to be something bigger, a cause. And whether that cause is incentivization or just being a good employee, there's got to be a cause, especially with younger people, but honestly, for all of us, right? We all wake up and go to work and do the hard things for our own sets of reasons. And so kind of segues and connects directly into something I know you and I are both incredibly passionate about, and that's storytelling. And that's maybe that's a misunderstood word, maybe it's overused, maybe it's underused, but one of the things that I've been fortunate and blessed to have some success with in my career, having grown up in television, and you too with an extensive broadcast background, is the desire and ability to tell your customer's story. And the great news is nowadays with tools and with daggone iPhones that are better than a lot of cameras, you don't even have to be a pro really anymore. But you have to commit to, look, if I'm going to create the DNA, if I'm going to create the thread that makes that workplace, takes the boss employee pressure away and brings everybody into clear focus, the reality of the people you're serving. Because in a lot of cases, especially in industrial and construction where we serve, those are some hardworking people, man. They're up at 3:45 in the morning. They're doing hard things for the next 15 hours every single day. And we consider ourselves, fortunate and blessed to serve them. But then there's all of our customers that are serving them at the front line, right? And so let's talk a minute about the power of storytelling, because I believe it synthesizes, it summarizes truth. Done properly, it illuminates reality. And if it's done really, really well, the boss and employee no longer do titles or roles matter. They just want to help that person, right? It's a common cause. And so, talk about that for a minute from your lens of things, the power of storytelling.
Yeah, such a great thing. And I think Bryan, both you and I have come up in video backgrounds, and a lot of people think about like, oh, Nolan, how'd you become a keynote speaker when you started as a videographer? And the fact is, it's all storytelling, right? And storytelling is the umbrella, is something that affects any type of organization, manage leadership style. So I want to actually take storytelling. I want to go two different routes with it. On one route, I want to go with how do you manage your team effectively internally, and then I'm gonna go storytelling externally with customers. So internally within employees, again, this goes back to Gen Z a little bit in like listening well. You know, what is everybody's story coming in? So for example, you might have one person on your team where they want to move up the ladder and they want to be an executive and they want to keep moving up. And man, they love their job and they want to keep moving up the ladder. There's going to be others, Gen Z and other folks too of other generations, but especially with Gen Z, where when they think about their dream job, it might just be a job that enables them to live their dream. So maybe they really like working at the organization they're in, but they love how at 5 o'clock they can get off and they can play intramural football and hang out with friends, or go to their son or daughter's practice and coach their little league team. Like that drives them. So some people work's going to drive them, and other people it's like, hey, this work treats me well, and I love the life I'm able to live with it. That motivates me to do my best. Both can be high performing people, but learning the story, listening will help you know, hey, how I motivate this person might be a little bit different with how I motivate that person. So again, the power of storytelling is first like learning the story. That also goes to the customer side. So what's the problems that the customer is facing? And how do I use my story maybe to be able to speak into that or just understand more of their story? So, maybe there's a connection point between you and the customer that you find. So like you want to let the customer talk first, right? And just kind of learn what's their problems, what's their background. Maybe you have a similar background that you can bond with. But I think what's important is that when you're telling your own story, people perceive it from their point of view. So for example, like if I say, hey, schools are winding down. If I tell you a story about I was in the 5th grade and the last day we have this field day, I go out on the playground and we're playing kickball and I round 3rd place and I slip and fall in the mud face first and everybody was laughing. When I told you that story, you were probably thinking of your own elementary school and you're thinking like, what did field day look like for you? Like a lot of times when you're perceiving other people's stories, you're actually putting a layer of your own background on it. So like when people are talking about their high school, you don't know what their high school looks like, but you know what yours look like. So I think when you're telling your story, your customer is actually perceiving it through their lens as well. And it can be, it's how you can grow those ties is storytelling, right? Learning what is the problem your customer is facing. Do I have any background in that I can bridge the gap? And if you don't have any background in that, then sometimes just reiterating what they're saying so that they know, oh, you get it. Like that's exactly what I'm saying. And you can even end it with a, do it as a question. So like, oh, if I understand this correctly, you're saying X, Y, and Z. So again, you're regurgitating what they said, and they're hearing that. They're like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I said. So again, the power of storytelling is also coupled with the power of asking really good questions and then being able to connect the dots, whether it's your own experience or what they're already saying.
Yeah, that's so true. The other thing that can happen, so we're trying to land the power of empathy, which can be tricky, right? Because the last thing any of us want to be told by their boss is, you should feel sorry for and be nice to that customer. Like, can you talk at somebody, especially from a seat of authority, and say, you should be an empath, you should be more empathetic? Really, really hard to do. They might do it while you're in the room, like, but what we need is authenticity there. And even as if there are plenty of us as employees that are customer facing people, we're having a bad day, man. Things aren't going well at home. The car broke down on the way to work, whatever it might be. And so for me to be truly empathetic, every single person that walks in the door may or may not be a realistic. But I think you hit gold there when you said, you can start with, we can teach our frontline employees, start with repeating what you heard, right? Because the perception of the customer is, okay, you're on your way to empathy. You're on your way there, right? And you're going to be really good with your skills and prowess of looking up the parts I need or the machine, whatever it might be. But you're on your way toward empathy there. Yeah, that's really good advice, because that can be a gap, especially maybe with Gen Z, but I think, Gen Xers as well. The screen time has taken us all into that myopic world, right? And so sometimes it's hard to like look up and appreciate all the battle that your customer's going through. So when you have really good, authentic storytelling, it kind of galvanizes this whole thing a little bit. But you can't teach empathy. I mean, yeah, I haven't figured out how yet. Maybe the best psychologist in the world can, but yeah, that's awesome. What else? Like what are you feeling out there?
I think, you were hitting a good point there, Brian. It's hard to teach empathy, and I think that's why, again, going back to your previous question about how do we motivate people, like, with the financials, you want empathy, you want to do the right thing, to be intrinsic, not always extrinsic, but you want, extrinsic to be a motivator, but you want the real drive to come from within, and it can be hard to teach that. And a picture to kind of paint in terms of what's the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. I would kind of, what I've kind of phrased it as is, if you see somebody in a hole or in a pit, sympathy is like, oh, somebody is down there in need. Empathy is getting down in the pit with them. Compassion is getting them out. So I think, as customer service, it's like, hey, we're going to see that people have a problem. We're going to get down and be like, hey, this is frustrating, but we're going to end with, hey, we're going to get people out of it. Like, we're going to help you get out, and we're going to provide a path forward. Again, there's a lot you can benefit from your organization, even from their business, in terms of, hey, they helped me out, but it's also just the nice thing to do. But also, listen, we can't overlook that some people are really tough to deal with, right? There will be some customers and some people where you cannot please them. And it doesn't matter what their age is. It doesn't matter if they're over 55, if it's their first job, and they just graduated college. Some people you can't please. Some customers you can't please. So I think it's important to you also have to have a defense. And I just want to spend just a minute or two talking about that. Again, going back to sports, but it's like, you can have a Patrick Mahomes or the best offense, but if you don't have a defense, you're going to lose. It doesn't matter how many points you score up on the board. Or the NBA finals are on right now. If they don't play defense, they will lose. So you have to have a defense. So there are going to be customers that are going to be really difficult. And what I paint to people at conferences and in organizations when I work with them is, it's kind of like the Titanic, where the Titanic, everybody knows the story, indestructible ship, hits an iceberg on its maiden voyage, sinks to the bottom of the ocean. The reason it was supposed to be indestructible is that, and actually in the keynotes I showed the blueprints, there were watertight compartments in the ship. In the happenstance it hit an iceberg, it would affect that compartment, but it wouldn't affect the rest of the ship. But in an unfathomable way, the engineers had not put lids on the watertight compartments. So when the iceberg hit, it filled up that compartment, spilled over to the next one, and then the next one, the ship splits in half, sinks to the bottom of the ocean. We know the story. If we're honest, this happened to us all the time. We hit an iceberg on Monday. Somebody treats us wrong. We get a spicy email, a rude customer on the phone. We hit that on Monday. The rest of the week is flooded. It's over. Or we get something at 9 a.m. as soon as we get to work, and then it's like, oh my gosh, my day's ruined. So it's like, how do we build that day tight compartment to be like, you know what, some things are going to really tick us off, but I'm going to have some defense over this. Like maybe it's like, hey, at lunch, I need to get outside and do a walk. Or there's a playlist on the phone. Like I need to listen to a song or do a meditation, a prayer. I need to call a friend. Or after work, I'm going for a run. I'm going for a workout. I'm going to burn some of the steam off. Like what can you do to make sure, let's put a lid on the day. We can't let today's problems sink tomorrow's boat. Like we got to keep this thing moving forward, and we're going to hit some icebergs. We're going to hit some glaciers that we can't change. But what we can do is we can put a lid on it to make sure, hey, we got to keep this thing above sea level, and let's keep moving forward, knowing that not every customer is going to be like that one. It's not going to influence how we treat future customers. We're going to still have compassion. We're going to build that day tight compartment.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that analogy always is so visual. We got a question from Doug. I'll get to that in a second. I just want to kind of seal that one up a little bit. One of the interesting things that's super compelling to me about the Daniel Group, and this is not a shameless self-promotion, I promise, but as a CX practitioner at a Caterpillar dealership, one of the things I was trying to do was get the most out of these surveys that we're getting back. There are thousands of them, right? And at the Daniel Group, I think we're sitting on over 1 million surveys over the last several years. And so you learn a lot from those surveys. And one of the things that we do in the surveys is we find out, we get good job reports. So if Nolan, stepped up and did something unbelievable to serve a customer, and the customer wants to compliment Nolan by name, they can, and they do. And so what I was learning as a CX practitioner is, let me look at it. And by the way, this was before AI was rocket speed like it is now. I was kind of doing this on spreadsheets, but I would, hey, how many times does Nolan's name appear in this past year's service surveys? And it's like, wow, 23 times. Like, dude is on it. And then you go look at that, and you're saying, what? He's a top performer. So I was doing two things with that, making sure Nolan's supervisor knew that, and others, like he's going above and beyond, but then trying to walk down the hallway to HR and say, the character attributes, the characteristics of Nolan might be something we kind of want to do as we recruit and hire and maybe even onboard. Like we ought to try to illuminate these things. So it's really a super powerful tool to be able to identify those things and then replicate and duplicate. And so as you were saying that, I was thinking about that all over again. Like that's a really good use of inbound data relative to CX and EX. Okay, Doug had a question. How do you manage the moments with Gen Z employees when you need to manage them rather than mentor them, especially when they're new? Some industrial roles are highly structured due to safety and quality constraints.
Yeah, great question, because especially in a lot of your all's field, there is a strict process to something. So I would say it's twofold. I would say when you're looking to hire folks, I think asking like, hey, what is your how do you handle feedback? Are you coachable? Being upfront with them on the front end is like, hey, this is a position that's going to require a lot of feedback and coachability. Are you open to that, so that it's not completely out of left field of like, oh, I didn't know this role. People are going to be telling me what to do. Being one thing on the front end, be upfront about that. On the second end, you kind of want to relate, and this is a skill and a muscle that can grow over time. And it's not soft. I mean, it's going to sound soft, but again, you're changing how you operate, right? In terms of how do we, again, the leader in the back pushing everybody forward. So it's kind of asking questions of like, on the front end, it's like, hey, what's important to you? Like, what's your career goals? What's important? Like, they might say, hey, I want to keep, getting more responsibility, moving up. Then you use that in terms of, hey, Steve, I know you want to keep moving up. I know that you want to be a leader. There's something I noticed that is going to put you in a better position to be that leader one day. Would you mind if I share that with you? So again, kind of phrasing it back to what's their goals, because they're not going to be as receptive to what the worker of yesterday has been of like, hey, just tell me what I need to do. Okay, no big deal. Some of them might be fine. I don't want to paint all of Gen Z in one bucket, but really kind of phrasing things that like what's important to them, how do I relate it back to them? Or maybe they're into sports, right? They love watching the Washington Commanders, and so it's maybe like, hey, I know like in football, they watch game film and the coaches kind of want to continue to refine them. I saw something that, if you're open to it, I would love to tell you how you can get better. Now, again, you're phrasing it if you're open to it. Really, it's like, hey, you better listen to this. But sometimes going in with that softer language will also kind of allow them to be more receptive. So also maybe over time, they're growing that muscle too of like, hey, Bryan, how can I get better? Like you want them to ask that question, but initially you are kind of strategically guiding them to be in a position to really have that hunger for feedback.
I guess the thought that popped into my mind was if you do this during the hiring process, and more, Bryan, we're finding that when we advise clients on how to build a CX culture, starting with hiring is important. And it's hard because then you got to talk to the other departments, but it's just, the word that popped in to my head, Nolan, when you mentioned it, was opt in. You allow the person who's going to fill that role to opt in to what it's going to look like. So they've chosen this rather than suddenly it's imposed on them. So anyway, great explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, it's also, the power of the word we. And I've always been very sensitive about this. I don't know why. Maybe it's just doing a gazillion sports growing up. It's always the team. It's the team. And even if you get a trophy or get an award, get some recognition, right? You thank the team. It's we that got here. And so I've always been very passionate / sensitive about that. But with today's younger folks, that can go a long way. So when you're saying, hey, are you open to coaching, Steve? Are you open to some coaching? Because here's some feedback I'd like to give you. We need you, right? Especially if you get any pushback. But we, meaning not just me, your boss, we, the team, and we, the customers out there that you're serving, we need you to do this at this time. And then all of a sudden they feel like, okay, this is a little bit safer because now it's not just about all attention on me. I'm part of a team. That could go a long, long way. And I'm seeing that more and more. I mean, it's just good practice, I think, for anybody. Nobody wants to hear, hey, I'm great. No, we are great. We are on our way to great as a team. It's humility, right? It's a humble servant. Anything else we're missing? We're about there on time. I don't want to hold you because I know you're probably getting on a plane going somewhere, but I guess remind us all how to get hold of you after this call, because I know you're booked up a lot this year, but you're doing some incredible things and helping some incredible companies. How do we access Nolan Nichols?
No, I appreciate that. I'll put it in the chat. It's nolannicholsspeaks.com. My email is at the bottom of the website. My LinkedIn is also at the bottom. If you go to nolannicholsspeaks.com, feel free to, it has all my information. But if you have questions about today of like, hey, Nolan, I would like to dive more into that. Do you have anything you can recommend to me to learn more about this? I'm happy to help be a resource to you all. So feel free to reach out. But if you go to nolannicholsspeaks.com, that will kind of bring you where you need to be.
You're the man. I don't care what they say. But we really appreciate your time and expertise. And thank you.
No, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here, and hope everybody has a great Friday and great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.